Despite being the most popular game ever created, Minecraft has a lot of elements that aren't talked about much in an analytical light. Particularly, the game's themes escape a lot of discussions about its design. Much has been said about how Minecraft emphasizes creative expression, of course, but I think there's more to be said about the game's overall theming, and how that ties into its aesthetics, mechanics, and value. In many ways, what Minecraft is attempting to do with its various pieces is somewhat complex. It often seems that the underlying themes of the game can't easily be summed up because they are so broad, and expressed through so many different areas of the design. I think this is part of the reason the specifics of Minecraft's thematic charm are woefully underdiscussed. It can feel like, if these ideas are put into words, some part of their worth is degraded, and thus they are better left unexplored so as to remain mysterious and appealing. Regardless of how complicated Minecraft's thematic package may seem, I believe much of it can be distilled into a relatively simple idea. Essentially, much of Minecraft is about dreams, in two meanings of the word. Not only is the game about creative aspirations, the sorts of dreams traditionally assigned to Minecraft, it also complements this thematic goal with dreamlike visuals and mechanics. By having the game appear and act like a dream, the ability of Minecraft to reflect its theme of creative ambition is greatly increased. In a way, a large chunk of these dreamlike aspects are both obvious, yet rarely mentioned. Considering so many of us are so familiar with this game, the ways it is aesthetically and mechanically dreamlike are often ignored, simply because we've gotten so used to the way the game is that these elements have faded into the background. The goal of this thematic analysis is to shine a spotlight on these often overlooked areas of Minecraft's design. The underlying systems and logic of the game are a good place to start. Many mechanics become clearly unrealistic if you take even a single step back. Most blocks don't obey the rules of gravity, monsters spawn out of nowhere during the night, and the player can gather and generate resources at ludicrous speeds. All of these things are relatively straightforward, and not at all uncommon for games. But it's noteworthy that Minecraft makes almost no effort at all to explain why things are this way, which is unusual. Most games at least have some minimum pretense as to why you're defeating enemies or going on your journey. Even a series as mechanically focused as Super Mario still has at least a minor narrative to inform the situation. This is why it's so exceptional that Minecraft has the self-confidence to drop the player into an infinite world with almost no pretense. Instead of explaining why anything works the way it does, it focuses the player's attention onto what actually matters, being the substance of the gameplay. And in doing so, it becomes unnecessary to explain anything in the first place. Because Minecraft is so obviously unrealistic, players stop questioning the reality of what they're seeing and instead accept it, just as they would in a dream. In other words, by letting the player's imagination run wild, Minecraft incentivizes the player to adopt behaviors that play into its dreamlike characteristics. Of course, this dreamy style is augmented by aesthetics that play into the dream. The animals of Minecraft have somewhat unsettling appearances and behaviors. They often roam around the environment aimlessly, moving in a sort of jerky manner that doesn't particularly match their live counterparts. In my eyes, their faces are shockingly human-looking as well. Their eyes, noses, ears, and mouths have more in common with ourselves than with any real-life creature these animals are supposed to be representations of. Again, there's thematic value here. Unless you live and work on a wool farm, you probably can't imagine an entirely robust and accurate picture of a sheep. We can all probably get pretty close, but compare your invented image and a photo of the real deal, and it's obvious you've missed some things and invented others. Details glazed over by your mind in reconstruction. That imperfect imagining of a sheep is the sort of imagery Minecraft taps into, further reinforcing the visuals of a dream. The less friendly creatures are just as good. While the day-night cycle of Minecraft is important for the pacing of the gameplay, it also has a lot of thematic import. If the day is a dream, then nighttime is a nightmare. If the dream represents our desire to create and express, then the night represents doubts that can creep in and undermine our ability to believe in our ambitions. It's worth noting that, no matter what happens during the day, the night will always come, just as any creative project of sufficient scale will be set back by hesitation. Of course, the night doesn't just make things more difficult by being darker, it also comes with a handful of enemies that stand ready to threaten the player. The majority of these monsters aren't original creations, and there's a certain benefit that comes with that. Zombies and skeletons slot right into stereotypical depictions of the undead, and it's not at all new for giant spiders to appear as a foe. This generic style for our enemies means that they more closely follow the blueprint of classic cultural depictions of nightmares. These designs also reinforce the idea that resistance to your dream may not just come from within. Sometimes the people and culture around you may reject your vision, as corny as that may sound. It's also worth noting that the zombie is a direct perversion of our self-insert in Steve, the symbolism being obvious. The creeper is an iconic exception to this general rule. Famously born out of a programming error, the creeper instead has a more direct, mechanical way to intrude on the player's dream. The ability to destroy blocks is crucial to their thematic relevance. By threatening the player along the creative axis, creepers are able to cause the player's dream to fracture in a more straightforward way. They also don't die when the sun comes up. Even when times are good, we should always stay vigilant against threats to our ambitions. The Nether takes the concept of a nightmare and turns it up to 11. While the nighttime is more reflective of momentary doubts, the Nether is an eternal realm of nightmares. Much of the terrain is lit by an ominous red hue due to the lava taking the place of the overworld's lakes and oceans. The environments here aren't just creepy and unsettling too, they present real danger, with lava pits and sharp cliffs everywhere. There's no escaping the implication that this is where dreams go to die. This dimension could be seen as the endpoint for those whose nightmares consume them. Instead of emerging out the other end with some perseverance, it continues to degrade their well-being, eventually resulting in the collapse of their dream, a very saddening thought. These thematic ideas about the day-night, dream-nightmare contrast are actually built into the mechanics as well. Beds are one of Minecraft's most important tools, but they also relate to the concept of dreams in a more direct way. With the night being a nightmare, it follows that the player would have some method to defend against its doubts. Fighting off monsters is a straightforward way of doing that, but there's a second one that's reflective of the real-life process of dreaming. Sleeping in a bed is a thematic reflection of renewing your commitment to a dream, passing by your doubts to emerge sure in your goals, even if you may experience some tribulations along the way. It's also of major importance that beds explode in the Nether. This world is supposed to be a restless one, where the player can find no surety in their dreams. This is a nightmare that won't be cleared up with a little nap and some soul-searching. While I think the dreamlike qualities of Minecraft become quite clear and obviously interrelated when examined, I would think that some of you are at least a little bit skeptical that all of this is that relevant. In case you think I'm pulling all of this out of my rear end, the credits poem explicitly refers to the game as a dream. The divine beings that talk to the player after defeating the Ender Dragon use dreams as a metaphor to talk about how people extract value from the games they play. Stopping the game, whether that be a temporary break or something more permanent, is referred to as waking up, disengaging from the game to emerge into the long dream of life. At its core, the game is making the case that, for all the fun we can have while experiencing a good game, its ultimate purpose should be to enrich our lives in some way. By dreaming, by playing, we distill ideas that we can bring into the long dream, and it's for this reason that Minecraft believes games are valuable. It's an extremely poignant point for a game as creatively inspiring as Minecraft to make. Combining this knowledge with the dreamlike elements of the game discussed previously, we can get a surprisingly clear picture of its themes. Ultimately, by serving as a creative sandbox hosted in a world of danger and excitement, Minecraft provides the player an escape to a world of dreams. It's a game that respects your ambition and passion to the utmost degree, confident in itself that you don't need additional prodding from a story or other unnecessary elements. There isn't a free ride to fulfillment, however. It lets you chase your dreams, not giving you help nor holding you back when it doesn't need to. Despite the game being quite explicit in regards to it being a dream, I still think many of the dreamlike qualities I've described thus far aligned in that way accidentally. It's no secret that Minecraft started life as an experiment, and much of the game's imagery was implemented the way it was out of necessity, not artistic forward thinking. Still, much of the rough, chunky programmer art that's still present in the game's current state has a certain charm to it, and whether or not you prefer it over the newer style, it does a lot to bring home that dreamlike quality. I'd like to use this thematic revelation to stake a claim about the evolution of Minecraft's aesthetics over time. It's become a bit in vogue culturally for people to say that they prefer the style of older Minecraft versions. Usually, that opinion is reasoned with something along the lines of, I think the old style is better for building with, or new Minecraft's visuals and mechanics are too complex. While I tend to agree, it's easy to see how these sorts of arguments can be brushed off due to how rooted they are in preference. But I think there's a real and tangible reason lying at the bottom of why many players feel this way about old Minecraft. I propose that the hard-to-articulate reason modern Minecraft has lost this magic is actually due, in large part, to the game becoming less dreamlike, both visually and mechanically. Many of the surreal and thematic visuals of the alpha and beta days have been altered or removed, and over the course of Minecraft's decade-and-a-half existence, the game has shifted into something that doesn't reflect its thematic value nearly as well, which I hope to demonstrate in the rest of this video. The Nether is the most obvious place to start. Once a barren, hellish realm, the Nether saw a massive overhaul with the release of version 1.16. Not only have many new blocks, creatures, and environments been added, the overall appearance and atmosphere of the place has changed considerably, to the detriment of the overall theming. The dimension has been lightened up considerably since the beta days, with a lot of areas that would have previously been cast in shadow fully lit by ambient lighting. Color variety is also much higher, with all different sorts of terrain, blocks, and even plants in this once demonic dimension. What's more, the fleshy, unsettling appearance of Netherrack has been changed to a more generic red stone-like material. It still looks unnatural, sure, but it doesn't carry the same borderline murderous weight. I can't help but feel that this overall shift has massively degraded the thematic value of the Nether. It's hard to call it an effective allegory for a nightmare when the place has more life than ever. It's even possible to fully survive here, with both wood and food sources having been added. Materials once reserved for the abundance and creativity of the Dream Realm have been thrust into the Nightmare, which confuses its thematic purpose to say the least. In addition, the way the game flavors the new Nether to be like a dynamic ecosystem damages its ability to effectively contrast the overworld. Its insistence on presenting a breathing, living environment causes the nightmare-like qualities of the place to be thrown off balance, planting questions and implications in the player's mind that undermine the once simple value of the dimension. When you start looking, you can find this shift away from thematically relevant, dreamlike visuals everywhere. Many modern Minecraft changes and additions have some amount of focus placed on realism, or at least a similar idea, which I feel misses the point entirely. To see this, we have to look at the relationship between reality and dreams, by which I mean the lack of a relationship. These two concepts are at odds with each other whenever they come into contact, and Minecraft isn't the sort of game to take advantage of that contrast. What's more, it seems that the designers don't understand what the old visuals potentially had to offer, and see them as merely old, vestigial elements of a jankier, less polished period of the game's development. What this means is that the somewhat accidental dreamlike qualities of the game are slowly being replaced by visuals that place a greater weight on other things, as it is assumed that the programmer art origins of this style were never going to offer as much as something more refined. This trend can actually be traced back earlier than you might be thinking. The alpha grass color is still the best at conveying a sense of dreamlike wonder. Its loud appearance isn't at all lifelike, but it does effectively give a feeling that this world is not real. Its bright color also provides excellent framing for whatever the player may choose to build, especially because the limited selection of building blocks all have nice contrast with the neon green of the surrounding terrain. Beta's leaves and grass weren't as bright, but still had a lot to offer with its rich green that, combined with the grayscale lighting, can really frame a building beautifully, while some environments featured an off yellow that wasn't particularly common in the grand scheme of things. Nowadays, the hue of most biomes is much duller, and many are similar to the worst of Beta's grass. Jungle grass is the closest to the classic foliage color, but the majority of others aren't nearly as vibrant. Most environments tend to feel washed out because much of that brightness has been removed. The lighting of the older versions is also very flattering when complemented with that brighter grass, even if the newer lighting may be more sophisticated from a technical perspective. Overall, I think that's a trend of Minecraft's changing visuals. Many of the new textures are better than the old ones in a vacuum, but the older ones hold some quality or charm that better complement the dream theme. Describing exactly what I mean by that is much harder than merely saying it though. It's a complex point to pull apart, and there's a plethora of different, hard-to-articulate ways that it could potentially be related to the visuals. If I had to, say, sum up my thoughts in an oversimplified manner to make a succinct point for a YouTube video, I would describe the difference as this. The modern textures are better at artistically depicting the thing, But the classic textures are better at showing a thematic representation of the thing. I'm aware that may sound pretentious, so a bit of explaining is in order. Compare the terrain and design of a modern forest biome against the visuals of alpha Minecraft. There's no doubt in my mind that the new visuals more closely depict the reality of a wooded area. However, the old visuals are better at conveying an idealized, pastoral vision of a tree-dotted landscape. In other words, the classic style more directly taps into an idyllic depiction of the natural world, and it's this aesthetic style that better aids the theme of a dream. This doesn't just apply to the natural world. New Minecraft's aesthetics also diminish player-made creations as well. One of the points consistently brought up in conversations about the strengths of old Minecraft is that, in having a limited number of blocks you have access to build with, the game is focused around using that selection in creative ways. While having more choices means that, in theory, the ceiling of possible builds is raised, it more often ends up being the case that the floor of execution is significantly lowered. There are now more ways than ever to make a mistake while building and create something unflattering and ugly. It's not just this, however. Even with a very restrictive block palette to choose from, the classic coloring and lighting complements these simple designs much better. Even though all of the possibilities of the older versions are still here, they often come across as amateur when created in modern versions, partially because the updated lighting is less forgiving to simplistic designs, and partially that the bright environmental textures that would have framed it are now missing. Instead of the built-in contrast and texture that the early lighting and details provided, players are nowadays expected to include some contrasting elements in the creation itself to make up for this missing ingredient. It's no wonder that making a build look nice in modern versions can be so difficult when the game's aesthetics seem to be bent towards having that be much harder. Build the same structure both in the latest version and in alpha or beta, and you'll see what I mean. It's like putting a more complementary frame on a painting. Minecraft has not only degraded in this dreamlike aspect aesthetically, but also mechanically. Classic Minecraft has a simplistic design that does its best to be as unobtrusive as possible. In contrast to newer versions, the core of the gameplay is extremely simple, as there aren't many side systems, mechanics, or generated structures that divert attention from the basics of play. Hunger is a straightforward example of this. In an effort to add believability to the world, as well as to implement more mechanical depth, food was greatly changed from its originally simple role. Instead of healing health directly, it now does so indirectly through a separate resource, where once the player didn't need to concern themselves with finding reliable food sources, now they do, which distracts from the focus on creative building. Ironically, in attempting to create a greater feeling of oneness with the world by reworking mechanics to align more with reality, it actually tends to do the opposite, because finding food and maintaining your hunger bar is a diversion from Minecraft's central ideas. It's also hard to consider this a good way to add depth to the gameplay, considering its lack of challenge and permanence. Obtaining a reliable food source is an issue that's solved 30 minutes into a new world, and ceases to be anything more than an occasional annoyance from that point on. Minecraft's combat systems are another area that used to be simpler. The combat updates focus on a realistic swing mechanic damages the simplicity of the weapons. Minecraft's fighting was originally intended to simply be a way for the player to ward off threats of the night. It's not really deep enough to provide a super interesting tactical experience against mobs, although the modular nature of the world does aid in making it more engaging. I don't think adding a timing element to attacks makes it any better either, especially considering the game isn't set up to capitalize on making the combat more in-depth. In fact, it's probably better if the player avoids combat as much as possible. The focus is supposed to be about other things after all, with combat as a secondary element to add danger to the night and tension to exploration. With this in mind, I don't think adding mechanical layers to the combat system is a good idea. It removes it a bit too much from its purpose by stripping away some of its simplicity. There's also a logistical downside to the increased material variety as well. A common experience I have while playing newer versions is that, after a relatively short time exploring, my inventory becomes filled with useless crap that I have no interest in using. Accidentally break a flower or three, mine a couple pieces of andesite or deep slate, or pick up a couple different kinds of saplings or a lily pad. And that's a good chunk of your inventory taken up right there. This issue causes a massive ballooning in the amount of time the player has to spend organizing chests and inventories, distracting from the actual meat and potatoes of the gameplay. Ultimately, inventory systems and management are there to make the game more interesting. If you're going on a journey, you can only take so many things with you. If your inventory is full of cool things, you need to figure out what you want to ditch if you need to grab something new. It's a way to add more problem solving into the gameplay structure, but if that problem solving isn't interesting, then that effort is not only wasted, it's counterproductive. Situations where some of the player's precious inventory slots are taken up with negligible items they have no intention of using may force the player to engage with inventory management, but that time could be spent doing better things. Problem is, modern Minecraft is set up in such a way so as to have these situations come up constantly. The inventory system is clearly designed so as to hold large amounts of a few different kinds of items, rather than small amounts of a large variety. Couple that with a game that now has more ways than ever to give the player a stray item, and you have a system that seems all in on filling up the player's inventory as quickly as possible. These mechanics are more at home in the ecosystem that they were originally designed for, a game with a limited amount of resource variety. This issue is exacerbated by the fact that the majority of items and blocks in older versions were either mechanically useful or very desirable for building. Not only is there less variety to clog your inventory, but the available materials were far more relevant. Many new items are either strictly reserved for building, or are useful in a tiny amount of recipes. The real devious element to this is that it makes managing them all the more painful. After adventuring for a while, your inventory will probably house at least a few items that don't serve a significant purpose. But throwing them away can feel like a betrayal of potential, even if their current instrumental value is small. Those flowering azaleas in your inventory may be useless right now, but who's to say that you won't want to use a few in a build down the road? Using a slot for a decorative item like that isn't the end of the world, but in the context of a game with dozens upon dozens of added items and blocks with a similar role, the bloat becomes apparent. In another example of how modern Minecraft's problems tend to be interrelated, the implementation of hunger has contributed to this issue in a large way. Before the adventure update, each type of animal dropped a single kind of item. Pigs dropped meat, cows dropped leather, sheep dropped wool, and chickens dropped feathers. Nice and clean and simple. This effectively distinguishes the animals and carves out mechanical niches for them, but it also minimizes the amount of inventory management you need to do with their drops. With the hunger system also came a lot of design pressure to weave that system into more and more elements of the game, and as such, food sources were slowly added to areas where they were previously absent, including the passive mobs that originally lacked meat. Not only has this significantly intruded upon the design of and diminished the relevance of pigs, it's also increased the amount of random items that can take up needed space in the inventory. If you don't need that meat from the chicken you killed for its feathers, or that mutton from the sheep you killed for its wool, as you likely won't, it's just taking up space, similar to how a niche decorative block would. Funnily enough, Alpha and Beta actually had a system already in place that would remove the need to collect the mutton if the player was just trying to build a bed on their first day. Punching sheep before the later beta versions of the game causes their wool to explode right off of them. It's a minor change, but I don't think shearing sheep is any better, and certainly not just because it's more realistic. There's no need for a lifelike shearing process mechanically, because hitting them indicates the player's desire to get their wool. The process is actually benefited by being so abstracted from reality, because a sheep's wool flying off of its body adds to the unreality of it all. Again, it's small, but I think it represents the sorts of decisions that go into making modern Minecraft feel so thematically disconnected from its roots. An additional kind of flower, an altered texture, or an updated lighting system are all slight on their own, but put them together with the hundreds of other changes and additions, and you can end up with a game that's missing a lot of what made its older versions so special. In summary, modern Minecraft is often too concerned with other things to effectively seize on the dreamlike elements that define its theming. In many cases, changes to the aesthetics and mechanics have diminished its relationship to a dream, but in others, the additions draw the focus away from the core of the gameplay, or convoluted in others. This video largely focused on how many changes can be put under the umbrella of realism, or at the very least the removal of the dreamlike, which I believe is a principle anathema to the thematic center of this game. However, not every addition can be so neatly categorized, and it's not clear that increasing how realistic Minecraft is a conscious, intentional design goal. It's not like that's been publicly stated or anything. It's my belief that many of these changes happen to remove dreamlike elements as an accidental byproduct of attempting other things. This is especially funny considering that much of Minecraft's classic aesthetics happen to align in the way they did accidentally as well. It seems both areas of design are at least partially informed by unintentional consequences. Don't get me wrong, there are signs that some weight is being placed on realism. Scrapping fireflies as the mechanism for making frog lights is a particularly noteworthy example, as the reason the team steered away from it in the end was that fireflies can be poisonous to some frogs. Needless to say, a very annoying justification, but there are clearly other factors at play besides reality. Particularly, modern Minecraft has drifted towards a more cutesy, cartoonish aesthetic in recent years, which I also don't feel is a good fit, but that's a topic for another time. In regards to how changes can have accidental side effects, I really do think that the team working on Minecraft has the best interest of the game at heart, even if their ideas about what would make the game better are very strange to me. If anything, many of the issues I've outlined can be explained by a desire to refine the basics by adding additions here and there. To be honest, I can't really blame anyone involved for wanting to do this. It's only natural to think that adding more polish is always a good thing, but sand down too many rough corners and the original shape of the thing might become unrecognizable. That hasn't totally been the case with Minecraft, at least yet, but many changes are emblematic of a worrying priority list. The modern design team continues to make choices that are baffling when compared against the original thematic value of the game, and this isn't even a wholly recent development when considering changes made 10 plus years ago, some even before the full release. If there's a takeaway from this analysis, let it be the importance of small changes. They may seem inconsequential in the grand scheme of a creative vision, but pile up hundreds of such decisions and you might suddenly realize that what you've now made is meaningfully different. That could be a desirable thing, but it's always a good idea to sanity check that you haven't lost sight of your dream.